Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dov Shamir. I'm the Senior Manager of Entrepreneurship for Mount Sinai Innovation Partners, and welcome to our bootcamp's Fireside Chat for 2021. Just to give a quick shout out to our different sponsors and partners for our bootcamp programming. Shout out to McCarter English, Alexandria Real Estate and Launch Labs, First Republic Bank, 17 Technology, as well as our partners at the ICANN School of Medicine and the Graduate School, and Sinai Biodesign. And MSIP is a proud provider of AWS Activate. I know several on the line are not from the Mount Sinai Health System, so just as a kind of a quick intro, Innovation Partners is the commercialization arm of the Mount Sinai Health System. We serve at the interface between the health system and commercial entities, basically to translate real-world healthcare solutions into real-world healthcare products that can benefit both patients and society. You'll be hearing a lot more about this from Erik and Cynthia in a couple minutes. This programming is part of a broader initiative out of our group, and this includes our bootcamp as well as our tech launchpad, which culminates in our pitch challenge at the end of the programming in May, I think 5th this year. And this is a programming that allows participants in the health system to basically take conceptual problems and solutions and help develop them into something that could be commercialized out of our health system. The bootcamp really focuses on the fundamentals of commercialization and entrepreneurship. The Tech Launchpad helps take those skill sets and helps translate them into something where the participants can then go out to investors, other key strategic or other stakeholders to basically better prepare themselves to attract other inputs that can help them essentially get their solutions out the door. This year, we have 80 plus bootcamp participants. To be determined how many Launchpad teams that will end up translating into, and we're looking at about 5 pitch challenge finalists from year to year. The bootcamp itself is open to all of those at the health system. It's a very low commitment of time, 1 to 2 hours a week. And it's really a playground where you can meet other people that are involved with innovation, commercialization, entrepreneurship. This includes our MSIP fellows, students at the institution, employees, and the Thrive participants at Biodesign. It covers everything from broad commercialization, entrepreneurship, tech transfer, investor diligence, sector intelligence, supply chain, basically everything that you as an entrepreneur or innovator will have to know, essentially to become knowledgeable and understand the language of commercialization. This culminates on December 10th with our company concept and technology presentations by bootcamp participants. And the following week, our MSIP fellows will provide evaluations on those technology or company concepts as part of their learning process in our tech transfer protocols. And with that, I will now leave it to Erik and Cynthia with the Fireside Chat.
Thanks, Dov. Thanks for the wonderful work you're doing with all the programs. Really appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. Hope everybody's doing well and looking forward to the weekend. By show of hands, like thumbs up, thumbs down. You can hear me fine, it seems like, right? Awesome, great. We have quite a diverse audience today. I wanted to just quickly check who's around. There's about 68 of you folks, lovely folks. And I'd like to just quickly ask, thumbs up for the ones that are part of the Fellows program. Okay, great. About 10 individuals. Anybody from our high schoolers, because we do outreach to our high school programs. All right, there's a few there. Great. Thanks for joining, Mariama. Really nice to see you. And also we have the larger Mount Sinai community, right? And are there any externals from Mount Sinai? Great. So one. Okay. We'll keep you in. I was going to say we'll kick them out. No, I'm just kidding. We'll keep you in because we'd love to have you as a collaborator, of course. So without further ado, my name is Cynthia Cleto. I lead the outreach and special programs efforts for Mount Sinai Innovation Partners. So out of just sheer honesty, I actually did not know about commercialization until 5 years ago. And I met Erik through a colleague of mine. I was in industry for over 10 years doing work in research analytics and data analytics for places like Elsevier and Springer, and met Erik, and he introduced me to this world, and I became fascinated. Joined MSIP about 5 years ago, and I continue to be inspired and excited about the lovely and life-changing technologies that are coming out of the office and of Mount Sinai, obviously. So today we'll learn more about commercialization from someone who has taken the same journey as you're taking now. So this is Dr. Erik Lium. He is the president of Mount Sinai Innovation Partners and Chief Commercial Innovation Officer of the Mount Sinai Health System. Erik, that's a mouthful. Prior to Mount Sinai, Erik held various positions at UCSF, including Assistant Vice Chancellor for Innovation, as well as Assistant Vice Chancellor for Research. He was also an entrepreneur. So he founded a company called Lab Velocity back in the late 90s. It's an information services company focused on advancing R&D in the life sciences. And he routinely advises venture boards and serves on the boards of some of those companies. He has a PhD in cellular, molecular, and biophysical studies at Columbia University and pursued postdoctoral training at UCSF as well. So welcome, Erik. How are you doing today?
I had to find the mute button. I'm doing well, thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Great. So we wanted to start off. We're going to have some time for Q&A with Erik later on, but we'll start off asking him a few of the questions that I thought you might be interested in, seeing that you're on this journey of commercialization yourself. So Erik, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you make your way, take your journey towards this field of commercialization?
Yeah, sure. And obviously, if people have any questions, they can use the function for raising their hand and be happy to address anything that comes up. So in my own journey started when I was in graduate school. And as, Cynthia, you did a very nice job. Thank you for the kind introduction. But I did my graduate work at Columbia University back in the 1990s. And in fact, I worked on the lab that I worked in focused on herpes simplex viruses and human papilloma viruses. And there was other labs that were adjacent that worked on polio and adeno and coronaviruses. So my PhD is actually in virology, which obviously has been helpful over the last couple of years with what we've all been facing. But during my graduate work, I had the opportunity to meet with some companies and did a little bit of, I don't know if I'd say consulting per se, but a little bit of work, and was really interested in the, kind of the corporate sector. Now, ultimately, I decided to do a postdoc, and I moved to the University of California, San Francisco. And this was in the late 1990s. And of course, the dot-com boom was on, a lot of companies were being created. And I just saw what was happening in Silicon Valley, and it was very exciting. And I met an individual who had some similar ideas to my ideas regarding an opportunity for a company, took a leave of absence. And so, took a risk, took a leave of absence from my postdoc and wrote a business plan, and ultimately recruited advisors, so people from the corporate world, from the business world, and then successfully raised venture capital and launched Lab Velocity. So, once we were in at that stage, then we built the company for 4 years, and ultimately were able to sell the company. It was a very challenging time in business, but that really set me on the path to, continue moving in this direction. Now, ultimately, after Lab Velocity, I ended up joining UCSF, really just after having lunch with someone there who was looking for someone to help at the intersection of academia and industry. And so I served in some different roles at UCSF that led to Assistant Vice Chancellor of Research and then of Innovation, Technology, and Alliances. So Cynthia, I'm not sure I answered your whole question, but my path really began as a graduate student, and I was curious. And if it hadn't worked out when I took the leave of absence, I would have gone back and continued my postdoctoral work.
And for Mariama and the high schoolers, right? Hopefully this journey is going to start even earlier for you guys, because then commercialization coming into the university setting. So Erik, what exactly does commercialization mean to you? And how do you feel MSIP, Mount Sinai Innovation Partners, embodies this?
Yeah, sure. Since it's a split question, you have to make sure that I stay on track. But, from my perspective, when we talk about commercialization, what we're talking about is really taking a very early stage idea. I mean, sometimes it's literally an idea written on the old saying, like on the back of a napkin. In other cases, we have faculty that have done, a few years of work. They have data. Maybe it's an invention, maybe it's not an invention yet. But when we talk about commercialization, what we're really talking about is taking something that is less mature and moving it to a state that is more mature, so that it becomes commercially relevant, so that we can actually partner with an existing company or partner with investors to create a company. But whatever it is, we're thinking about what kind of a product would be built, how is it going to benefit patients, because obviously everything we do really is in healthcare. And then how can we move that technology closer and closer to a point where it's actually a product, actually can be commercialized and actually can be used by members of the healthcare community or directly by patients. Now, the second part of your question really is more about, to me, what is MSIP's role in helping to commercialize technology in an academic, an academic medical center and a large health system. And so our role is to really do many things, but really is to be helpful. So we play a role in identifying technologies, working with people that have ideas, coaching on, okay, that's a really interesting idea. This is what we need to take it to a later stage. We spend a lot of time talking with members of companies or investors about what they think about particular ideas or technologies that we have, because then we can provide that feedback back to our students, postdocs, research scientists, faculty, et cetera. And then we also, I think, are responsible for, we have a duty to try to create an inviting and helpful environment within Mount Sinai for our innovators. And again, innovators can be students, postdocs, right? Graduate students, medical students, et cetera. And so obviously, we run these kind of programs, other types of programs related to innovation and entrepreneurship. We're part of the I-Core program or the Innovation Core, which is run by the National Science Foundation and also the NIH. And so we do a lot of that. We manage our large relationships with partners and make sure that they're successful. And then part of MSIP also includes a transaction team, so attorneys that complete transactions with entities so that we have business relationships with them. We also have a patent team. So our role is very diverse, but what I'd like everyone to walk away from, from this discussion with is an understanding that MSIP is really here to help and has the expertise and the ability to help broadly in moving technologies forward and finding partners. I don't know, Cynthia, did I answer the question? Does anybody have any questions on what I said?
Anli says yes, you're answering the question. And Anli actually has a follow-up question. Anli, did you want to unmute yourself or go on the screen and ask the question? You know,
Yeah,
just
so
so
I
it's,
think,
yeah.
yeah, I think my question is just during the research, what would be the best time to approach MSIP to see, where the research going? I mean, there's many steps. So I don't know, just like when would be the best time?
Yeah, and that's a fantastic question. So thank you for asking it. And my answer almost always is as early as possible. So, the moment that you think that you've got something, the light bulb goes off and it's like, wow, I think this is really something that could be very interesting. I would reach out, and you can engage with MSIP through our portal and start a technology disclosure. You don't even have to finish the whole disclosure. You can just put something in to start a conversation with us. Obviously, you can contact one of the numerous people in Innovation Partners, and they can meet with you. Our members of the business development team for Innovation Partners try to attend departmental meetings periodically. So there's a lot of different ways to get a hold of us, but what we always say is don't ever be afraid to engage with us early. The one thing I will say is that it's always really important to remember that, if you're going to give a presentation at a conference, whether it be in person or virtual, you're going to do a poster, you're going to publish a paper, whatever, you're going to put information out publicly about what you're working on. Just keep in mind that if you disclose your invention or your idea publicly before we have a chance to file a patent, you very likely would lose the opportunity to file a patent because you'd already publicly disclosed. And so that's why we always encourage people to talk with us earlier than later, because we don't want to accidentally have a situation where we lose an opportunity to protect an important piece of intellectual property or invention.
Great, thanks, Eriks. I just pasted the IP disclosure form on the chat. So if anybody's curious about that, you can take a look there. And I think in terms of disclosure as early as possible, that's probably already a nice segue to the next question. Disclosure is obviously a best practice. We want to make sure that we know about what you are inventing in order to protect it. So the next question is actually, Erik, what are some of the best practices for commercialization to happen? And how do you apply this in an academic medical center like Mount Sinai, as well as the hospital system that it contains?
Sure, and I mean, I'd first say that that's a very, very, very broad question. And when we think about best practices, there's a lot that can be learned through programs like this or Innovation Core, just hands-on experience, what have you. But from the perspective of Innovation Partners, best practices really is I would say first and foremost, we have a process that we follow for analyzing inventions, searching to, has someone else made an invention, the same invention or something very similar previously, developing, a really comprehensive understanding of what's the invention, what's the market, what's the competition, what's the regulatory pathway, all of those kinds of things. And so you really have to understand and work to understand as much as you can about the technology and the market and the opportunity. And then, of course, there's a lot of different approaches that come into play of, investing in specific targeted experiments to move an asset forward or a technology forward. Investing in creating a prototype, for example, or a second generation prototype. We spend a lot of money on working with outside patent counsel and with people with all different expertise, backgrounds in chemistry and biology and engineering and physics and what have you. And, I always say that, one of the best practices would, beyond just contact us, disclose early, is never underestimate the value of people around you. Leverage them, talk with them. When I started to get into trying to develop a company, the first thing that I did was recognize that there was a lot of things that I didn't know, and recruited advisors that had been in, significant positions in industry for decades. And so, that's that's one of the best practices that, always rely on. I'm sure I'm leaving a lot of things out, and innovation partners, as an example, we run funds that invest little bits of money, a little bit more money, sometimes lots of money in companies. And for us, right, there's approaches to how we do that and why we do that and what's the right time. But what I'd say is, again, MSIP is here to help, and we can share these best practices with you openly and in a manner that can help advance your projects.
Great. Ian, you had a question. Actually, did you want to unmute yourself or go on screen to ask that? That would be great. Hey, Ian.
Yeah, sure. Hi, guys. So I suppose my question is, who are the innovator-facing contacts of MSIP, and how is that relationship handled over time? When you initiate that conversation of disclosure, how exactly does MSIP follow up to make sure that conversation is continued and brought sort of throughout the innovation lifecycle?
Yeah, so great question. So the one of the teams that is, really out and interacting with the innovators on a daily basis is the business development team. I also think it's the largest team within Innovation Partners, which kind of makes sense. Innovation Partners is, roughly, we've got some open positions that we're recruiting now, but, in the high 50 individuals, 50 full-time employees. Now, when you think about it, and this is a bit of a qualification, Mount Sinai is 40-some thousand employees. And so it can be a challenge to follow up with everybody and to meet everybody, but we do try very hard. And that's why we have a portal, you can disclose, we have events, what have you. Once you're connected with one of the members of the business development team, either through me or Cynthia or the portal, or right, we're going to all work to get you to someone. And the business development team, they specialize in different fields and different departments. So there's an individual or two that is assigned to every department. And once there's a disclosure, then there's a fairly rigorous process of how that's moved forward. We can't really move anything forward without talking to the innovator, because you're the expert, right? We become an expert based on working with you as well, but we have to work with you. If we're going to file a patent, you have to be involved. If you're a student, the faculty will be involved as well, right? It really is a team sport if we're going to be successful. We do, as a goal, we try from the moment that a disclosure is complete to actually getting back what we call a decision support document. We try to do that in 60 to 90 days. And again, there's dialogue going on during that process. At least that's how it should work. So we try to stay very much in contact. And then over time, we do provide feedback on, hey, this is what we think it's going to take to move what you have to a stage where a pharmaceutical company, a biotech company, med device, what have you, would be interested, or an investor. And in some cases, maybe a venture capital approach isn't the right approach, but maybe an approach where an SBIR or an STTR grant could be pursued. Now, keep in mind that those grants are only available to companies. Mount Sinai is not allowed to apply for those grants, but if there's a company that applies, and then they can fund back to Mount Sinai to continue advancing the technology. So hopefully I answered your question. We just, simply put, we try very hard to keep the dialogue going and to provide feedback. And then if we invest in the project through our I3 Genesis Accelerator program, then we're working very closely because there's a milestone-based development plan. We're following up on, did this experiment work? If it didn't work, why didn't it work? What do we need to do? Did the contract research organization that we engaged deliver? All of those kinds of things. Because those projects are maximum 24 months, and we really want to have a very clear understanding of success or failure and what it is that we're trying to get to at the end of that time frame.
Okay, and do you have a single contact point between the innovator and MSIP, or are you interacting with multiple departments within MSIP? As
you would generally have a point person, and that would be a person on the business development team, and they would be your, kind of your lead. But to the degree that, like Phil Semprevio is right in front of me in terms of the screen here. Phil is the director of our transactions team. And you might need, if you needed to do an MTA or a data transfer agreement or a sponsored research agreement, you might end up talking to Phil or one of his team because they're handling that contract and they would need information from you as well. So you will have a point person, but you'd also interact with others within the team based on what you need to advance the, your research and your project. And by the way, Phil's team does thousands of contracts a year just in support of our research enterprise, MTAs, DTAs, SRAs, CTAs, on and on and on. So, his team is quite busy, but that's an example where you'd be interacting with others.
Yeah, Phil's team is so busy, he eats in front of the computer and telling me he's going to be on screen soon, but he'll finish his lunch. We have quite a slew of questions on the chat. So I wanted to give the floor to An Lee. Would you unmute or show your screen again just to ask your question, followed by Mariama after that?
Hi. Yes, sure. So my question is just, would the MSIP help researchers to connect the potential innovators to raise funds? Because I think, this project mainly they come up product probably from initial funding from NIH, but if you want to move forward to the commercialization, and either you will require more fundings or look forward to find the business partners. I just don't know how does it work in that transition time.
Yeah, so the business development team of Innovation Partners we have extensive networks of individuals that we work with. We know a lot of venture capitalists. There's a lot we don't know, but we have the ability to reach out to them as well. And we generally have a pretty good understanding of what they're going to require in order to be interested in a project. And we've got lots of examples of projects where we've worked for 3-4 years with the scientists and gotten at the end of that time to a point where, we're launching a company, we've got investors interested. One of the things that is, it can happen there's different ways. For example, one of the companies that we launched this year was with Versant Ventures. And Versant Ventures was familiar with our investigator and became interested in one of his inventions. And then it was a period of, 9, 10, 11 months of discussions and all sorts of different things, planning, et cetera. And ultimately it resulted in Mount Sinai licensing technology to a company that was just created by Versant Ventures to advance that technology. So in some cases, we're working with investors that are creating a company that are interested in what you're working on. In other cases, like if we put in I3 accelerator funding, then we're investing in the project and we'd be looking for investors to come and join us. We've had projects where we have some investors in London that we work with. And so we put projects in front of them, and if they're interested, now I think it's in 3 cases we've partnered. They've put in initial capital, we've put in initial capital, and then we've created a company and then taken that company public on the London AIM Stock Exchange. One example is Trellis Health, which was based on technologies developed by Marla Dubinsky and Lori Kiefer. And we took Trellis Health public in London earlier this year and raised $40 million US.
Wow.
So yeah, we've got a lot of examples of how we do this, but we definitely take on outreach to investors. But sometimes investors will find an investigator at a conference too, and that'll be how the conversation starts.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anli. Next is Mariama from our Fellows Program.
Yes. So my question is, you were talking about when you were working on your earlier company you created, you started very early looking for like advisors. So I wanted to know, like, how do you go about that? Do you have to compensate them, and what does that involve? Especially when you're starting up very early, you might not have that much budget or something like that.
Yeah, so I actually, I didn't know what I was doing at the time. And frankly, one person I contacted was a friend of my parents, of all things. But I just started to think about, well, who do I know in business, and who's in this particular field, and how could I meet them? Now, actually, the way that I would approach it today is that you've got entities available to you like innovation partners. And so we know a lot of people that we could introduce you to who could introduce you to other people. So one of the things that's always important is if you meet someone at a conference or a meeting or an innovation class or something like that, is you can always say, well, gee, I'd love to talk with you more and get your ideas. And I'd love to understand who you think I should talk with about my idea. And again, you have to, right? We can provide advice in terms of how much information you give away at the beginning, or you describe the use of confidentiality agreements and things like that. But generally speaking, I think there's a lot of resources that can help you connect with people who you can then talk with, and then ask, well, who they know who might be interested in what you're doing. And pretty soon you get introduced to enough people that you start to develop an understanding of not only how good is your idea, but also people that you might want to invite to become an advisor. And in my own experience, when I did, actually the first person that I spoke to said, well, if I'm going to become an advisor, then I want to make sure, I want you to go talk to this person and this person. And if they think what you're proposing is a good idea as well, then we'll become advisors together. And I ultimately ended up with 3 initial advisors based on that approach.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mariama. And I think there's a few more questions. Bhaskar, would you like to ask your question, unmute yourself and go on screen, please? If you're still there. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. It's a very, really lot of the information you people are giving is really very good. And is very informative. And to my question, how many small molecule based technology Mount Sinai has already transferred to the other companies?
Bhaskar, off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that, but we have done quite a bit of licensing of small molecules. When I joined Mount Sinai in 2014, I would argue that the largest category of technologies at Mount Sinai was what I think of as foundational technologies for therapeutics. And a lot of them were in the small molecule space. Now, there's a lot of development in large molecules at Mount Sinai, so antibody type molecules as well. But you know, the project that we did that led Versant Ventures to launch a company, that was a small molecule. And that was just 4 or 5 months ago. Now, I don't know if, I think degraders would still be considered small molecules, but you know, there's a lot of interest in the degrader field right now, and there's a significant number of conversations going on in that field. And then, you know, some of the work in renal as well that I think that you're aware of.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bhaskar. Next is Leonidas. Did I say that right? You had a question.
Well, I was wondering, when you were talking about marketing the idea, the strategy that you choose, if you either choose a license or creating a startup, what's the key factor for choosing like creation of a startup? Because I wonder that maybe a startup can give you like more kind of infrastructure to develop that idea, but maybe sometimes you only have one idea or a specific product that may not be suitable for a startup. So what are the key factors to differentiate both of them?
Yeah, that's a great question. You already identified and commented yourself just now on some of the key factors. So, you know, one key factor is the size of the opportunity. You know, what is the unmet need that you're going to be solving? How big of a market opportunity is that? And it may be an important unmet need, but it may be a very, very small market. Now, I wouldn't lump, you know, let's say, you know, like rare or orphan diseases. Those are small markets, but they're very important. And again, in therapeutics, that can be a very effective strategy for a startup. One of the most important things from my perspective is if you have a technology that you believe, that we believe really could be the basis for a meaningful product, and you're not getting any attention, or you're not getting licensing opportunities from large or medium to large size companies, well, then you really don't have a choice. At that point, you have to probably start a company. And one of the problems in general with just licensing to an existing company is that existing companies might be risk averse. And so you need to actually create a company to actually advance the technology further and then partner with a larger company. So there's a lot of different factors that come into it, but you know, when you go out to the market and you start talking to companies and investors about an opportunity, most of the time it becomes clear whether a startup strategy is appropriate or a licensing strategy is. Now, we have had situations where we have venture capitalists that are interested in pursuing a startup approach, a very well-funded startup approach, and large pharmaceutical companies that are also interested. And in that kind of a situation, what we do is we do a full analysis of, you know, what the proposals are that exist, and then work with the inventors to ultimately make the right decision on whether to license to a large company or go with an investor and pursue a startup strategy.
Great, thanks, Eric. Alexander had quite a lengthy question on the chat. So Alexander, maybe you could do more justice to the question. Would you mind going on unmute and on the screen if possible?
Sure, happy to talk. So my question was about developing new technologies and licensing in the context of an academic center. So this might be kind of like very obvious, but when you're working in academics, often the currency is publication, but you just mentioned that when you're disclosing publicly in a poster presentation or a talk or what paper, you might lose the opportunity to patent. So I was wondering, how do you balance those two competing interests? And I was wondering if you could give an example of presenting something publicly in an academic setting without losing the opportunity to patent later.
Yeah, sure. It would take me a bit to think of a specific example, like a specific case, but I can certainly speak to this in more general terms, which is if you're talking to innovation partners, then we would be working with you to make sure that any disclosure that you were going to make was not going to result in the loss of rights. And so one of the most simple approaches is we'll file a patent. Now, if the technology is too immature, then what we can do, too immature for a patent, then what we can do is not only talk about what would be needed for a patent, but also talk about what information that you're disclosing and how you could avoid losing the right to file a patent in the future. So, for example, if you don't disclose what's considered, and this is a term of art, enabling. If you don't disclose how to enable the invention, then technically it hasn't been disclosed. So, like for example, we've had people give talks about small molecule discoveries that they've made, and they just don't disclose all the small molecules. Now, sometimes journals, they for a paper, they want them to be disclosed. And in those cases, again, we'll file. And sometimes we'll do just a very simple initial patent filing. I apologize, I realized I was saying filing a patent. And in other cases, if the technology is further along, a little bit more mature, we'll file a very robust patent. But in order to protect the technology, one of the very easiest strategies is just to file a patent. And so one of the things that's different about patent strategy in an academic medical center or a university versus a pharmaceutical company is that we tend to file patents much earlier, years earlier than a pharmaceutical company would, because we have to enable our students, postdocs, faculty, our scientists to publish. And so, because we agree that the currency in academia, the currency is publication. And so we do a lot to make sure that publications can go forward. Sybil Lombio, who is here today, I don't know, Sybil, if you're able to jump in and comment, but Sybil is our managing director for intellectual property. She's a patent attorney and a scientist. And so, she's very experienced and can comment to these issues as well.
Yeah, generally, the message is that if you feel, if there's a potential for an invention, working with our office would, we work with a lot of investigators to assess, how the risk involved in the disclosure, and again, whether it's commercially valuable. If it's really not commercially valuable, if it's just disclosure talking about a mechanism of action, then that's not really what we would protect anyway. So, if an investigator feels that their research is potentially inventive and important, then the best approach is to work with us, and we, rather than slow publication, we'll just quickly, as Erik mentioned, give you advice and help work with you to ensure that you can publish on schedule, but at the same time we've preserved any potential value in intellectual property.
Yeah, I mean, there are instances where we have to make snap judgments and file patents very quickly. Those are not ideal, but you find out that a paper was submitted, it's going to all of a sudden be published in a couple of days, and you just have to make a quick decision and file. We try to avoid that as much as possible, and that's why we say, work with us, engage with us, talk with us, because then we can really get ahead of those kinds of issues. If you say, hey, I'm going to publish a paper in February, that gives us 3 months, 4 months to really work on understanding the invention and filing a patent appropriately.
And giving you advice that, yeah, it's okay to publish that because that's not, the strategy that we would want to employ anyway. So,
yeah, I was going to add, and you'll learn, for those of you, I think, in the internship program, there's specific portions that focus on, filing patents, for example, and what is eligible for filing a patent. Targets, for example, if you identify, you think that you've identified a target for a potential therapeutic, it's actually almost impossible to protect with a patent a target because it's a naturally occurring, right? It's in a human being. It's not really patentable subject matter. Whereas if it's small molecules or large molecules that will bind to or in some manner change the biological properties of the target in a manner that would be consistent with the therapeutic, those are patentable. And so, kind of as Sybil was saying, we generally just, targets are something that you could talk about, but the molecules that you develop to modify the targets are things we'd like to protect. Now, there's one exception to that. Targets can be great biomarkers for diagnostics or companion diagnostics for therapeutics or for prognostics. And so there are cases where we will file on a target if in fact it's a biomarker for that would be appropriate for a prognostic or a diagnostic. Did I get all that right, Sybil?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
Great.
Thanks, Sybil and Erik. Thanks for the guest appearance, Sybil. An Lee, you had another question, I believe.
Yeah, it's just a very quick one. So because you keep saying the licensing and startup strategies, I just wonder if you can just explain to us what the difference between these two strategies.
Yeah, that's a good question. And the language that we use is a little confusing at times. Everything that we do when we transfer technology, patents, what have you, to a commercial entity, it's always a license. It doesn't matter if it's a large multinational pharmaceutical company or a startup company. The technology transfer component it's always in a form of a license. And so even when we talk about startups, it's still licensing. But the difference between a startup strategy, including a license, and a licensing strategy with a larger company, existing company, would be that with the larger company, we're really just negotiating a license, and then we're enabling through that license for that company to work with our investigator. And by the way, a lot of times the larger company will fund work in the investigator's laboratory. There's obviously material transfer, data transfer, all sorts of things that have to happen associated with that license. But we're not participating in the creation of a new company. When there's a startup that's going to be receiving a license, sometimes a venture capitalist creates the startup, sometimes Mount Sinai creates the startup. There may be other approaches to this, but really the two major buckets of activities are licensing to existing companies or licensing to a new company and in varying degrees participating in the creation of that company. Does that help?
Yes, and then so what determines which strategy will be more suitable?
Well, as I commented earlier, it really depends on the technology. It depends on the market, the unmet need you're solving, how big a market it is, the competition. We find that there are technologies that large companies are very interested in. And a lot of times a large company can move a technology forward very rapidly because they understand the regulatory environment, clinical trials, they've got the capital. So licensing to a larger company can be a very good strategy. On the other hand, when a larger entity isn't interested, or for other factors that we may take into consideration, we may prefer to pursue a license to a startup company and help create that company. You know, if we don't, for example, if we didn't feel that we were getting fair and reasonable economics in a license to an existing company, we might decide that it's more advantageous to try to start our own company. And again, the most important thing is we work with the inventors, we work with the faculty, et cetera, on those decisions. But it is definitely, this is an important thing that, you know, coming into MSIP and just saying, you know, here's my technology, I want to do a startup, that might be the right thing, but it might not be the right thing. And so it's important to have an open mind and to work collaboratively to figure out what the best strategy is.
Thank you. That was helpful. Thanks.
Thanks, Onli. Asad, you had a question as well.
Hello, everyone. This is Azadeh. Thank you for hosting this. It's been such an informative discussion. I had a very broad question. What are some of the biggest challenges you've seen and are seeing in the healthcare field, and what should innovators be focusing on, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, that's a broad question. Obviously, there's, I think there's tremendous opportunities well, first of all, let me just take a step back. We think about drugs, devices, diagnostics, digital health solutions, research tools, and platforms. You know, I think there's enormous opportunities in the field of advanced diagnostics and prognostics. What we know, and Innovation Partners has been very much involved in creating some companies pursuing the development of prognostics to address important unmet needs. But what we know is that healthcare costs are skyrocketing, and that we need to do a better job in predicting, you know, who would develop certain diseases, how to try to avoid developing those diseases, right? And we know there's some diseases that, like type 2 diabetes, right? There's a lot that can be done in some cases. And so that's where prognostics, you know, one of the companies we created has developed a prognostic that can distinguish for individuals that have diabetes-driven kidney disease, can identify the individuals that are at high risk of rapid progression to renal failure versus those that are at low risk. And so if you think about it and put yourself in the shoes of an individual that just was diagnosed with kidney disease, you've also got diabetes, you probably are going to ask the question, well, what do I expect next? And up until now, there haven't been any good solutions to answer that question. And so I like the field of advanced diagnostics and prognostics because I think that it can, you know, really help us to improve patients' lives. There's obviously very good opportunities in therapeutics. Cancer or oncology is a very, very complex market because of the competition. But there's other fields that haven't received the attention that they would deserve, like kidney disease, for example, liver fibrosis, pulmonary fibrosis. You know, there's a lot of diseases we don't understand yet, and there's real opportunities there. I also think that the intersection of medical devices and information technology can be very interesting. So new types of devices that help people manage diseases or stay in their homes or what have you can be very effective, and there's opportunities there. Digital health, telehealth, those kinds of, the challenge in that market is that there's an enormous amount of competition. and not a lot of barriers to entry. And so you have a lot of big companies that have already raised a lot of money, and software in general is difficult. It's difficult to create patents that give you protection from another company building something that's very similar to what you've done. So that's a little bit more challenging, but you know, I'm sure that there's still great opportunities in that field as well. Artificial intelligence and machine learning, obviously there's a lot of things being developed in those fields. There's no way I can even begin to predict the great things that may be coming. But you know, it's certainly a field that I would, that we'll be paying attention to. So I apologize if I'm not being specific enough, but you know, this could be a very long conversation. But we'd be happy to chat further.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Azadi. We are now a minute to the hour, so unfortunately we're a little bit out of time. But I just wanted to close and ask just like a very last question for Erik. A lot of the folks here on this call are thinking of commercialization potentially as a career, or maybe working alongside commercialization in a research or clinical capacity, right? So Erik, do you have any advice to those folks that are on this journey? You know, what are the skills and what are they needing aside from what they have right now that gotten from the lab or from academia? What are some important skills?
I think one of the most important skills is to use the people that are around you, you know, in a good way, right? To learn from them, learn from innovation partners, learn from other advisors. You know, obviously Innovation Partners runs programs, but there's a lot of additional programs that are available for people that are interested in healthcare innovation and entrepreneurship. And so I think just learning as much as you can is, you know, being open-minded, learning is really, really important, and it's a great skill. You know, one of the things that has served me well in my own journey is to always know that there's someone else that knows more than you do out there. The minute you think you know everything is the moment you're going to find out that you don't. So, you know, I've always taken pride on, you know, collaborating and working with people and talking with people and really learning from them. I happen to be a really curious person, in general, and to try to learn as much as I can. Now, look, of course, if you're going to pursue product development, right, you need to understand product development. You need to understand what it takes to take something through a product through a regulatory approval process in healthcare. You know, the FDA regulates products in the United States, the EMA for the European Union. You can't sell a product if it's not approved in some manner. So you have to understand those things. In terms of company formation, you have to understand operations and finance. And an MBA can be a very useful tool. In an MBA, not only do you learn business skills, but you also develop a network of individuals that are also doing MBAs that can be helpful as you start collaborating with people on developing an idea further or potentially creating a company. So Cynthia, I'm not sure I'm answering the question completely, but hopefully that's helpful.
Great. Thanks so much, Erik. That's our time for today, folks. It was really nice to see you. Thank you for the lively discussion today and hope to keep in touch. All right. Have a great weekend. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.